The small town on the edge of the forest always avoided the old well. No one knew when it appeared, but everyone knew one rule: never go near it at night. But Jake, tired of horror stories, decided to check it out himself. Armed with a flashlight, he went to the well at midnight, as if something was moving there. Suddenly, the flashlight began to blink, and from the depths came a whisper. "Help! Me!" Jake, trembling, shone the light into the well, but saw only black water. A hand appeared from the water, then a second, and finally a creature with a faceless black face crawled out. Jessica reached an old cabin deep in the woods late at night. Friends said it had been abandoned for decades, but she decided to spend the night there to test herself. It was cold inside and smelled damp. The walls were covered with faded photographs of strangers. One in particular caught Jessica's attention. It showed a family, a mother, father, and child, but their faces were blurry, as if someone had erased them. Later, when they went to bed, Jessica was awakened by a creaking sound. Someone was walking down the hallway. She stood up and headed for the door. When she opened it, she saw that the hallway was empty. At that moment, a voice whispered behind her, "You've gone too far." She turned around and saw how the photographs on the walls had changed. Now she was on each of them, but her face was starting to fade too. She tried to leave the cabin, but the door was locked. Outside, dark silhouettes covered the windows, and someone's voice whispered in unison, "Now you are part of our history." Jack was driving home along an old country road. The forest stretched around him, and only the headlights cut through the pitch darkness. Suddenly, the car stalled. Jack cursed and got out to check the engine. There was an eerie silence around. Not even crickets could be heard. Suddenly, he heard a quiet whisper, "Help!" Jack turned around, but saw no one. The whisper was repeated, this time closer. In the light of his pocket flashlight, he noticed tracks in the wet ground leading into the forest. At first, Jack thought about going back to the car, but something made him follow them. He went deeper into the forest, and soon a figure of a woman with long hair appeared in front of him, standing with her back to him. Jack called out to her, but she did not turn around. Taking a step forward, he reached out to touch her shoulder. The woman turned around abruptly, and her face was distorted, with empty black eye sockets. The last thing Jack heard was her wild scream before the darkness swallowed him. Night. Thomas was driving along a deserted road surrounded by dense forest. The only sound was the hum of the engine. Ahead in the fog, he noticed a road sign. As he got closer, he realized it wasn't a sign. It was a wooden cross with the inscription, "Take care, traveler." Confused, Thomas continued on his way. After a few miles, the headlights caught something strange on the road. A single boot, and a few meters later, a second one. He decided to speed up, but then something hit the side of the car. Thomas stopped abruptly. He got out with a flashlight, illuminated the bushes. No one. He got back in and turned the ignition key. The car wouldn't start. A face flashed in the rear-view mirror, dirty with empty eye sockets. The creature's hands were lying on the back seat. Thomas screamed, but didn't have time to do anything. The creature whispered hoarsely, "You are mine now." On Route 66, in the middle of the night, Jenny was driving home from a trip. She noticed an old pickup truck behind her, driving too close. Its headlights were blinding her mirrors and its engine was roaring, as if the driver wanted to scare her. Jenny sped up, but the truck kept up. She tried to pull over, but the car behind her did the same. Then she decided to stop. Her heart was pounding when a man in a cowboy hat got out of the truck. He walked up to her window, but before she could roll it down, he yelled, "Run! He's behind you!" Jenny turned around and saw a shadow in her rearview mirror. The figure in the back seat leaned over and whispered in her ear, "It's too late." The world went silent. In the morning, an empty car was found on the highway, with tire tracks disappearing into the sand. Night. Tom stopped at an abandoned gas station in the middle of the desert. The fuel gauge was at 0. The only light above the pump flickered, creating a gloomy atmosphere. There was no one around. He got out of the car and started to fill up. A faint metallic scraping sound came from far away, like someone was pushing an old cart. Tom was wary, but he saw no one. Entering a tiny store to pay, he found that there was no one at the cash register. An old TV hung on the wall, black and white static playing on the screen. "Hey, is anyone here?" he called out, but all he got was a strange, quiet laugh, as if from far away. Tom turned to the door and froze. There was a figure standing behind the glass, tall with long limbs, his face hidden by a hood. The stranger raised his hand and pointed at the car.
Night fell on the deserted highway, filling it with the cold light of the moon. Alexei drove, wearily peering into the darkness. A figure flashed on the side of the road ahead. A woman in a long white dress waved her hand at him. Gritting his teeth, Alexei stopped. She came closer, and her face seemed strangely blurred, as if through a veil. "Help," she whispered. "They abandoned me here." He opened the door, and she sat down next to him, shivering. The engine started, but the temperature in the cabin seemed to drop. "Where should I take you?" Alexei asked, but the woman was silent. He noticed her reflection in the mirror. It was absent. His heart sank, and he turned sharply to the passenger seat. She was gone. A second later, the car stalled. Alexei looked ahead and froze. The woman stood in front of the hood, her face finally taking shape, glassy eyes and a terrifying smile. The highway was silent again.
Jessica was driving home late at night. The highway was completely empty. Only the headlights of her car cut through the thick darkness. The radio crackled, the connection was lost, and she turned it off, enjoying the silence. Suddenly, the phone in the car rang. It was strange. She knew that there was no signal in this place. The number was unknown, but curiosity got the better of her. "Hello," she said. In response, only rustling and quiet. Barely audible breathing were heard. "Who is it?" Jessica's voice trembled. A whisper answered, "You are not alone." She hung up, pressed the gas pedal, and continued on her way, feeling how fear paralyzed her body. Jessica looked in the rearview mirror and gasped. There was someone sitting in the back seat, smiling quietly.